Right now, there is a teenager in China using an autonomous AI bot to build a more profitable company than a legacy American retailer
Yeah.
that is literally in the process of shutting down 150 stores.
Yeah, it's wild.
And the single thread connecting those two completely disparate events.
Mm.
A military drone strike on a gas facility in the Middle East.
Which is just, the reality of a global economy we're tracking right now. It's this massive, highly sensitive web
Right.
where extreme friction in the physical world is just violently colliding with this unprecedented acceleration in the digital world.
And that is exactly our mission for today's deep dive.
Yeah.
We have a massive stack of sources today, articles, research papers, market data, and we're going to extract the actual underlying mechanisms driving all this chaos.
There's a lot to get through.
Oh, absolutely. We're looking at how a geopolitical shock in the Middle East ripples outward, mechanically stalling the Federal Reserve, squeezing your wallet at the checkout counter, and simultaneously creating these bizarre, totally detached booms in AI and biological optimization.
Right.
If you're listening to this, we know your goal. You want to understand how all these pieces impact you without drowning in the noise.
And to understand the mechanics of how these events connect, we really have to look closely at the raw facts from the sources.
Definitely. But before we get to those facts, a quick but mandatory disclaimer. Today's sources do contain politically charged content regarding the U.S. administration, the DOJ, and the Middle East conflict.
Yeah, it gets pretty heavy.
It does. So we will impartially report the facts exactly as they appear in the sources without taking any sides or endorsing any viewpoints. We're simply here to convey the ideas contained in the original material so you have the full picture.
Exactly. And the absolute center of this current storm, the thing driving everything else right now, is the global energy market.
Right, the Middle East escalation.
Yeah. So it began when Israel reportedly struck Iran's largest gas processing facility, which is located down in Bushehr province.
Okay.
And in immediate retaliation, Iran explicitly threatened to strike critical oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar.
Which, that's the core of global oil production.
Right. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard actually issued direct warnings for people to stay away from prime economic targets. They specifically named the Samref refinery in Saudi Arabia and the Al Hosn gas field in the UAE.
So the entire region's energy infrastructure is essentially being held hostage by the threat of escalation.
Which triggers this immediate mechanical reaction in the global supply chain. Diesel has topped $5 a gallon for the first time since 2022.
Wow, $5.
Yeah, and Brent crude, the international benchmark, that hit $107.38 a barrel.
That's a massive spike.
It is. The disruption in global transit routes is so severe right now that President Trump just issued a 60-day waiver of the 1920 Jones Act.
Okay, wait, let's pause on the Jones Act for a second. How does waiving a century-old maritime law actually factor into lowering the price of gas for you and me?
So the Jones Act dictates that any goods transported by water between two U.S. ports,
Like from Texas to New York or whatever.
Exactly. It mandates those goods must be carried on ships that are U.S. flagged, built in the U.S., and owned by U.S. citizens. It's a very strict protectionist law.
Right.
By waiving it for 60 days, the administration is legally allowing foreign flagged tankers to move domestic oil. The mechanism here is about creating sudden supply liquidity.
So they're just trying to bypass the global bottleneck by using every single ship they can find.
Precisely. They are doing everything to stabilize domestic prices, while Vice President J.D. Vance and Energy Secretary Chris Wright are actually actively meeting with the American Petroleum Institute to negotiate further supply stabilization.
But the thing is, you can't really isolate an energy shock, right? Because energy is the fundamental baseline input cost for moving literally everything else in the physical world.
Exactly. Everything gets more expensive.
Which means a spike in diesel bleeds directly into broader inflation.
And the latest data proves that mechanical link. The Producer Price Index, which measures wholesale inflation before goods even reach the consumer, that just jumped 0.7%.
Oh.
Yeah. That sudden, unexpected spike in input costs crashed the Dow by 768 points, sending it to a new 2026 low.
Right.
And it effectively forced the Federal Reserve's hand. They just voted 11-1 to hold interest rates steady at 3.5 to 3.75%, with only Governor Stephen Marin dissenting.
Let's use an analogy to explain what the Fed is doing here. Because interest rates act kind of like the gravity of the economy.
That's a good way to look at it.
Right. When the Fed raises rates, they are turning up the gravity. They're making it heavier and harder for companies to borrow, to expand, and to spend, which naturally slows down inflation.
Yeah.
So right now, this Middle East oil shock is like suddenly forcing the economy to carry a 50-pound backpack.
And the Fed can't lower the gravity right now because they are absolutely terrified that cheaper borrowing costs, combined with that $5 diesel, will just cause consumer prices to spiral totally out of control. Chair Jerome Powell explicitly noted that the implications of the Middle East developments are just, they're simply too uncertain. The Fed's dot plot still technically projects one rate cut later this year, but officials are rapidly revising their internal projections away from cuts.
But the timing of this gridlock is incredibly messy.
Yeah.
Because there's this unprecedented layer of political pressure surrounding Powell right now.
Oh, the DOJ investigation.
Exactly. His term as chair is officially up soon, but he intends to stay on as chair pro tem until his nominated successor, Kevin Warsh, is confirmed. But Powell is refusing to leave the Board of Governors entirely until the Department of Justice officially closes an ongoing investigation into his office renovations.
Right, so the DOJ has issued subpoenas regarding the funding and the contracts for those specific renovations.
It's just wild to see at the Fed level.
It is.
Yeah.
And Judge Boasberg recently blocked those subpoenas. He explicitly stated in his ruling that there is a, quote, mountain of evidence suggesting this is a coordinated legal pressure campaign to force Powell into either lowering rates or resigning his post. Yeah. Prosecutor Jeanine Pirro called the ruling outrageous and is actively appealing it. And adding to all this gridlock, Senator Tom Tillis is actually holding up Kevin Warsh's confirmation in the Senate until this entire Powell investigation is resolved.
Okay, wait, let's unpack this for a second. If the administration desperately wants rate cuts, why is the market assuming the Fed is completely paralyzed by all this?
Yeah.
Wouldn't a massive legal pressure campaign eventually force their hand?
Well, the fundamental mechanism of central banking relies entirely on perceived independence.
Right.
Because the DOJ is utilizing legal levers like subpoenas, the market assumes Powell will stick even more rigidly to the hard inflation data just to prove he isn't capitulating to political demands.
Ah, so he has to look strong.
Exactly. That 0.7% jump in wholesale inflation gives him the exact mathematical justification he needs to hold rates high. If he cuts rates now, the market will perceive it as a loss of Fed independence, which would trigger massive instability.
Which brings the consequences of this global standoff directly to your wallet. When the Fed keeps the gravity turned up, your borrowing costs stay elevated.
Because the prime rate dictates consumer credit. With the Fed holding at 3.5 to 3.75%, credit card APR are currently hovering near a punishing 20%.
20%. That is just brutal.
It is. For everyday consumers carrying a balance, the compounding math on 20% interest just aggressively erodes their monthly purchasing power.
The sources mention a surge in people utilizing credit card hardship programs to try and survive this. But how do those actually work? I mean, it's not just a free pass from the bank to stop paying, right?
Far from it. When you enroll in a hardship program, the credit issuer might temporarily lower your interest rate or waive your late fees to help you catch up.
Which sounds good on paper.
It does, but the mechanical trade-off is that the bank immediately mitigates their own risk by freezing or outright closing your account. You can't use the card anymore.
Oh, wow. So you lose that safety net.
Exactly. And this drops your total available credit, which artificially spikes your credit utilization ratio. So while you get short-term breathing room on the interest payments, your credit score takes a significant, lasting hit.
There are alternatives mentioned in the sources, right? Like securing 21-month 0% balance transfer cards from Citi or Wells Fargo, or maybe taking out a debt consolidation loan from platforms like Upstart.
Yeah, those are options.
But the irony is that you need a very strong credit score to qualify for those escape hatches in the first place.
Exactly.
If you are stuck paying 20% interest, your purchasing power basically evaporates.
Yeah.
And the stores you shop at are feeling that exact same evaporation.
Oh, absolutely. Lululemon is a prime example of this right now. They just issued very weak guidance for 2026.
Really? Lululemon?
Yeah. A massive part of their problem is macroeconomic friction. Tariffs are projected to cost them $380 million on a gross basis this year alone.
Wait, here's where it gets really interesting, though. Lululemon sells premium athleisure. I mean, their core demographic usually has a bit more financial buffer against a 20% credit card APR. Shouldn't they be somewhat immune to this?
You'd think so.
It sounds like their internal boardroom drama is doing just as much damage as the macroeconomic tariffs.
You're completely right. The internal mechanics of the company are absolutely fracturing. Founder Chip Wilson, who remains their largest independent shareholder, is waging a fierce proxy battle.
What's his main argument?
He claims the board has completely lost its creative vision. He actually just successfully pushed board member David Mussafer out, arguing there was a severe lack of independent leadership.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and in response, the board countered by bringing on Levi's former CEO, Chip Bergh.
So they are trying to figure out how to absorb $380 million in new tariff costs without raising retail prices so high that they alienate their premium buyers, all while fighting a literal civil war in the boardroom.
It's a mess. But contrast that internal chaos with how Macy's is navigating the exact same consumer environment.
Right. Macy's had an interesting quarter.
They did. Macy's actually beat their Q4 expectations, but they're executing a brutal defensive pivot. They are extending a timeline to close 150 of their namesake stores by 2028.
That's a huge footprint reduction.
It is. They're liquidating the underperforming real estate to get better valuations, and they're funneling that capital directly into the 200 stores they are keeping.
Upgrading them, basically.
Exactly. Upgrading visual displays, adding staff, bringing in trendier merchandise.
And if you look inside Macy's portfolio, you see the exact divide happening in the broader economy because their higher-end brand, Bloomingdale's, just had its best holiday season ever.
Which is incredibly telling.
It really highlights a fractured landscape.
Yeah.
The middle-class consumer is being incredibly cautious because of those credit card rates, while the upper-end consumer remains largely insulated and just continues to spend freely.
But here's the thing. Whether a retailer is selling basic apparel or luxury handbags, the entire business model collapses if they physically cannot move the product to the consumer's front door.
Right.
And right now, there is a massive logistical standoff happening in the United States.
You're talking about Amazon and the U.S. Coastal Service. It's at a total breaking point. I mean, it sounds like two roommates who absolutely hate each other but can't afford to break the lease, yet Amazon is quietly building a mansion in the backyard just in case.
That is the perfect way to describe it. Amazon claims that the USPS walked away from contract renewal negotiations at the, quote, 11th hour in December.
Wow.
To put that in perspective, Amazon relies on the USPS to deliver roughly 1.7 billion packages a year.
But why does Amazon need the Postal Service so badly? I mean, they have those prime vans everywhere. Why can't they just deliver it all themselves?
The underlying friction here is the mechanism of rural logistics. Delivering a package in a dense urban city is highly profitable because an Amazon driver can drop off 50 packages on a single block.
Right, it's super efficient.
Exactly. But delivering to a rural address means driving 10 miles to drop off one $15 item. It absolutely destroys profit margins.
Oh, I see.
So Amazon historically relied on the USPS for that last-mile rural delivery because the Postal Service is legally mandated to visit every single address in America every single day, regardless of profitability.
And Amazon claims they actually wanted to increase their volume with the post office, right?
They do, but the Postal Service is completely bleeding cash.
Yeah.
The Postmaster General recently testified to Congress that the USPS will run out of money in less than 12 months.
Less than a year. That is staggering.
Because Amazon cannot allow a bankrupt partner to jeopardize its core delivery promise to consumers, they are systematically engineering a workaround. Amazon is committing $4 billion to triple the size of their own rural delivery network by 2026.
Wow.
They are physically building the infrastructure to remove their reliance on a vulnerable external government system.
So the logistics of moving cheap cardboard boxes are breaking down. But if we pivot back to the Middle East conflict, we see that the logistics of moving ultra-luxury goods are also freezing up in the exact same way.
It's true. The Middle East has developed into a crucial high-margin territory for premium automakers. Porsche, for instance, makes 28% more profit per car sold in the Middle East today than they did in 2020.
That's a huge margin jump.
It is. The 911 model alone accounts for 20% of all their sales in that region.
And the sources highlight Porsche's Sonderwunsch division, which that's their bespoke custom tailoring program where buyers customize literally every inch of the vehicle. Right. That specific business grew by 125% over there. We're talking about highly customized, incredibly expensive physical assets.
But the mechanism of luxury spending relies entirely on geopolitical stability. VW Group's CEO, Oliver Bloom, admitted the escalating war directly threatens this showroom traffic.
Which makes sense.
When you have military strikes on energy infrastructure and a bottleneck at the Strait of Hormuz, capital flight begins. Ultra-wealthy buyers delay custom orders, And the physical supply chains required to ship specialized European auto parts into the region just freeze up.
So the friction of the physical world really spares no one, not even custom Porsche buyers.
Exactly.
Well, we spent the first half of this deep dive tracking how the physical world, you know, oil tankers, retail stores, delivery trucks, car showrooms, is just bogged down by conflict and friction. But the sources show a fascinating, completely detached reality happening in the digital space.
It's like a different planet.
It really is. The artificial intelligence boom seems entirely immune to the gravity of the physical economy.
The divergence is stark, and it really starts at the hardware level.
Yeah.
Micron Technology, which is a massive manufacturer of computer memory chips, saw its revenue almost triple year over year to $23.86 billion.
A cripple.
Yes, and their gross margins doubled to 74.4%.
But why Micron specifically? I mean, what is the mechanical bottleneck they are solving for artificial intelligence that allows them to literally double their margins?
So the bottleneck in AI processing isn't just how fast a processor can think, it's how fast it can retrieve data from memory banks to fuel those thoughts. Data bandwidth is the ultimate constraint.
Okay, that makes sense.
Micron is producing the new HBM4 memory high bandwidth memory. This specific hardware architecture is structurally required to feed data into NVIDIA's upcoming Vera Rubin AI chips.
So it's a bottleneck for the biggest player.
Exactly. There's a massive global supply constraint for this specific type of memory, and Micron is effectively dictating the terms to the market.
So the physical hardware is printing money, but the cultural shift happening with the software side is what really alters the landscape. Just look at what is happening in China right now.
Oh, the OpenClaw assistant.
Yes. Every day, people are obsessing over this new AI assistant called OpenClaw, which was developed by Peter Steinberger. The Chinese public has actually jokingly nicknamed using it raising a lobster.
Because OpenClaw isn't just a chatbot that answers questions. Mechanically, it is an autonomous agent.
Right.
It can surf the web, input credit card information to buy tickets, and direct other subordinate bots to execute complex workflows. This is fueling a massive trend in China called the OPC, the one-person company.
So what does this actually mean for the future of work? I mean, is an AI one-person company a legitimate, functioning corporation, or is it just a freelancer with a really fast digital intern?
Right now, it completely blurs the line. An individual is using OpenClaw to fully automate marketing, finance, and administrative tasks 24/7. The Chinese government is aggressively subsidizing companies that build applications on top of this tool, even while issuing simultaneous warnings about data security. When a single individual can scale their daily output to match a traditional mid-sized business, the fundamental barrier to entry for entrepreneurship just collapses.
And we are seeing the raw power of this digital economy flooding into U.S. politics and media right now, too.
We are. AI and crypto-backed super PACs, such as Leading the Future, are injecting millions of dollars into U.S. congressional primaries.
Like in Illinois.
Exactly. We're seeing this heavily in Illinois. They're utilizing their massive digital wealth to try and install lawmakers who will engineer light-touch regulatory frameworks for their specific industries.
Meanwhile, you have legacy tech giants who are desperately paying to keep your attention in this new landscape. Meta is actively trying to buy back cultural relevance.
Yeah, the creator payouts.
They are paying individual creators anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000 a month simply to post short-form reels to what Mark Zuckerberg called OG Facebook.
The mechanism here is sheer capital force. Meta paid out nearly $3 billion to creators in 2025 alone.
$3 billion just for posting videos.
Because they understand that in a digital economy that is completely detached from physical supply chains, human attention is the absolute baseline currency. They are willing to pay massive premiums to artificially stimulate engagement rather than lose your attention to TikTok or YouTube.
So we're optimizing our supply chains. We're using autonomous agents to optimize our software and our labor. But the final piece of this puzzle from our sources dives into how we are aggressively trying to optimize human biology itself and the severe hidden costs of doing so.
We're seeing staggering leaps in medical innovation. Johnson & Johnson just secured FDA approval for Icotide. It's a once-daily pill designed to treat moderate to severe plaque psoriasis.
Let's look at the mechanics of why a pill is so disruptive here.
Yeah.
Because the alternative treatments for this condition cost about $100,000 a year.
Yeah, it's incredibly expensive.
Wait, so we're going from a six-figure injection to a daily pill. That completely disrupts the pharmaceutical revenue model.
It democratizes access instantly. The existing treatments, like Tremfya and Skyrizi, are injectable biologics. They require refrigeration and clinical administration. For the 8 million Americans suffering from this condition, a daily pill is a logistical miracle.
It really is.
But as we look at biological optimization, the sources highlight a massive warning sign regarding reliance on these medical shortcuts. A huge new study out of Washington University analyzed over 330,000 adults using GLP-1 weight loss drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy to see what mechanically happens when a patient stops taking them.
Right, because the cardiovascular benefits of being on these drugs are well documented.
Right.
The study confirmed that staying on a GLP-1 lowers your cardiovascular risk by 18%.
Right.
But the shock came when they looked at the patients who quit.
If a patient stops taking the drug and experiences a 2-year gap in treatment, their risk of heart attack, stroke, and death doesn't just return to their original baseline. It shoots up to 22% higher than if they had stayed on the medication.
22% higher.
The researchers labeled this severe reaction metabolic whiplash.
What is the biological mechanism causing that whiplash, though? I mean, why does the body crash so hard when the drug is removed?
Well, GLP-1s artificially stimulate insulin production and reduce systemic inflammation. While you're on the drug, your body downregulates its own natural mechanisms because the pharmaceutical is doing all the heavy lifting.
Ah, so it gets lazy.
Essentially, yes.
Right.
The insulin receptors go dormant. When you suddenly remove the drug, your biological infrastructure is completely unprepared to manage blood sugar and inflammation on its own. The metrics rapidly reverse course, crashing worse than before you started.
Oh.
And with discontinuation rates for these drugs running anywhere from 36 to 81%, mostly due to severe side effects or high out-of-pocket costs, we are staring down a massive public health crisis of metabolic whiplash.
It proves that biological optimization requires a permanent structural commitment. You know, taking a GLP-1 is basically like hiring a high-end financial advisor for your metabolism. The moment you fire them, your body immediately goes bankrupt.
That's a great comparison.
You just can't temporarily hack your metabolism for a few months and expect the foundation to hold when you walk away. And we see the exact same whiplash mechanism in the financial world. Look at what happens when you suddenly remove financial constraints from a young athlete.
Right, the J.P. Morgan Initiative, they just launched an athlete council, bringing in major sports figures like Dwyane Wade and Tom Brady. The specific goal is to help young athletes manage sudden, massive infusions of wealth from the moment they're drafted all the way through their retirement.
Because the statistics on sudden wealth are just brutal. 1 in 6 NFL players declares bankruptcy within 12 years of retiring from the league.
The mechanics of sudden wealth really mimic the mechanics of rapid weight loss. If you receive a massive influx of capital but lack the educational resources and structural boundaries to manage it, the burn rate inevitably exceeds the principal.
Right.
Just as a patient needs a lifelong behavioral plan to survive coming off a GLP-1, an athlete needs a lifelong infrastructural plan, trusts, financial advisors, and strict budgets to transition from active income to passive preservation.
So how do we pull all of these threads together for you? What is the overarching mechanism driving the sources we unpack today?
I think we are navigating an era defined by extreme physical friction colliding with extreme digital and biological acceleration.
Yeah.
A geopolitical conflict in the Middle East throttles the global energy supply, which spikes input costs and inflation, which forces the Federal Reserve to hold interest rates high, which leaves you paying 20% APR on your credit card, while legacy retailers restructure to survive.
But simultaneously, the digital and biological worlds are bypassing that friction entirely. A teenager in China deploys an autonomous AI agent to run a business. A daily pill rewires how millions manage autoimmune diseases, and memory chips become the most valuable real estate on Earth.
Human ingenuity is constantly engineering workarounds in code and chemistry to bypass the physical roadblocks of the modern world.
And for you listening, recognizing these mechanisms gives you the ultimate advantage. Understanding how a drone strike near the Strait of Hormuz eventually dictates the interest rate on your balance transfer card, or realizing that a medical marvel requires a lifelong structural commitment rather than a quick fix. This is how you navigate the noise without getting blindsided by the headlines.
It requires looking past the surface statistics and questioning the machinery underneath, which leaves us with a final, somewhat provocative concept to consider based on today's deep dive.
Let's hear it.
If artificial intelligence can increasingly replace our administrative labor, and GLP-1s can chemically rewire our fundamental biological cravings, What happens to the global economy when human behavior itself becomes fully programmable?
That is a fascinating thread to pull on. Keep an eye on the mechanisms. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.